It's been a long road getting from there to here. Hi, I'm Joe, and this BlueBrixx model is the United Earth Enterprise NX-01, the main ship from the TV show Star Trek Enterprise, and also the final model in my current Star Trek collection. The show Enterprise premiered on September 26, 2001, or exactly 24 years ago on the day this video is publishing. This show is one I didn't watch when it was originally on TV for a couple of reasons. Before the premiere, Star Trek had been on TV for 14 consecutive seasons with 3 different shows set in the same time frame of the 24th century. Star Trek Voyager completed its final season in the spring of 2001, and I had seen a few promotions for a new show called Enterprise, but I never saw enough to know what it was about or even if it was a Star Trek show because it didn't have Star Trek in the title. The other reason I didn't watch is because Enterprise was on UPN, and my local UPN channel was a UHF station. I had DirecTV, which at the time was not allowed to carry local channels unless you lived too far away to get them by antenna. I could only barely tune UPN, and only if I went outside and rotated my antenna. And I still didn't know what Enterprise was, so I didn't watch. I missed most of the last 3 seasons of Voyager for the same reason. But apparently I wasn't the only one who had problems figuring out what Enterprise was, because by season 3 the title was changed to add the word Star Trek, and the show still got canceled after 4 seasons. But the show was set in the Star Trek universe in the 22nd century in the year 2151, or only 150 years into the future instead of 300 years in the future like the original series was. The Enterprise NX-01 was the first Earth ship designed to travel as fast as Warp 5, and this was 10 years before the establishment of the United Federation of Planets, so this is the United Earth ship Enterprise. And Earth had not established relations with many alien species at this point, with the Vulcans initiating first contact in 2063 and essentially shepherding humans before allowing them to venture into deep space. And at this point, there's a lot of tension between the humans and the Vulcans. The show starts with first contact between Earth and the Klingons when a Klingon crash lands on Earth, and the Enterprise makes its maiden voyage to transport the Klingon back to his homeworld. However, they need star charts from the Vulcans to know how to get there. So a crew of 80 humans and 1 Vulcan, and this guy, head out into the unknown to complete this mission and then continue looking for strange new worlds. And there's definitely a spirit of exploration at the beginning of this show, and the opening credits speak to that. And I'm not talking about the song, which you heard the first lyrics of at the beginning of this video, as that was not well received, but how the opening credits are a montage of clips showing previous ships named Enterprise, including the shuttle, and other highlights of human exploration. But the technology of 2151 is inferior to the other Star Trek ships we've seen. There were no tractor beams, so the ship had grapplers. The ship didn't have phasers at first, only torpedoes that were really slow and pretty weak. Hand phasers were called phase pistols. The ship didn't have shields, they polarized the hull plating. Artificial gravity was inconsistent inside the ship. There were no force fields, no universal translators, and there was a transporter which was safe for human use, but many humans were nervous about it, and shuttle pods were more regularly used. And the inside of the ship was designed to be more functional and was more like the inside of a submarine, with very few luxuries. The outside of the ship has the same aesthetic, with it looking more like bare metal than the pristine gray or white that the ships had in Star Trek shows set in later times. And this BlueBrixx model reflects that well, as the entire ship is built in flat silver and dark pearl gray bricks, which distinguishes it from the other Star Trek ships. And while I eventually did see the show, and I did like it, even though it's not my favorite, but I think this might be my favorite brick-built model of a Star Trek ship. Let's look at some highlights of the build process, and then the overall model. First, we'll take a look at the stand, and at this point, BlueBrixx had evolved their design for stands, and if we look at it straight on, it actually looks like a silhouette of the NX-01, which I think is a really cool idea. The first part of the build we do is the saucer section, which is the bulk of the ship, because the NX-01 didn't have a secondary hull, and the center of the saucer section is fairly straightforward. It's just all these pieces here in the middle, lots of snot bricks, and a few plates on top to kind of help hold things together. But then the most challenging part of the entire ship is adding the curved sides, because you can kind of see here in the instructions, we're building each side up separately and then connecting the entire subassembly at one time. However, that subassembly is some 27 studs long, and you've got some of these bricks here that are, they're snot bricks, and they're up and down, and they have studs on the side on some cases. Like that's a snot brick, that's a snot brick, there's one. And trying to keep all those in alignment is very challenging across 27 studs because these pieces don't always sit flush together. You really got to smash them together. And when you let go, they don't always stay together. And because this is so large, I mean, I can't squeeze that together with one hand. So I'm using one hand to hold the piece on the side that I'm supposed to be adding, and the other is holding the saucer section, which is also harder to build because it's not flat on the other side. There are snot bricks there too, because we're going to build up both the top and the bottom. Here we see some of the printed bricks in this partially assembled state. So I found it very challenging to get these sub-assemblies on the side added, and I kind of cheated a little bit because here is where they meet. These two plates here are where the sub-assembly starts. And to get this whole thing on, instead of trying to put the entire sub-assembly on, I actually just peeled off that bottom layer of plates and put them on individually. And doing that kind of helped hold the middle assembly together so it didn't have any gaps, and it kept the other studs more lined up. And once I had like one row of plates here, I was able to line up the rest of the sub-assembly and get those added. Then the next steps will actually add more plates, larger plates that keep those two side pieces connected. And then the model becomes much more stable once those plates have been added. And now we're on to bag 3, which is where we finally put the plates on the top that will really secure these two side pieces. I mean, we already have some little bits here that are helping to keep those sides on securely, but they're not holding on by much. But we're going to put plates here across the top. And because of how tight that all is, I began to wonder whether or not this is actually a legal building technique. But I took a look here. We're supposed to put this plate here in this spot. And one challenge of putting that in, besides possible illegal building technique, is the fact that the instructions have us build the bottom first. And because this is domed, we can't just set the model down and press down because it's wobbling all around. And that's why you kind of have to have both hands free to be able to build anything on this saucer section. But I thought I would look, because I had wondered, because of the challenges I had getting the sides lined up, are the studs legal? Like these here, I have no question about. It's whether this piece here, which is one of the parts of the side of the saucer, and therefore it's mounted sideways, and just eyeball testing, it looks like they are aligned. And I'll go ahead and check the math here. This is the most questionable part. Well, we've got a stud here and a stud here, and are those exactly 4 studs apart? They do seem to be lined up vertically. And we'll go ahead and do the math here. These bricks, or this style of brick building, each stud is approximately 2.5 plates apart, with each brick being 3 plates high. So the distance between this stud and this stud is 2.5 plates, and so forth, because 2.5 plates is the width of a brick. The height of a brick is 3 plates. So this next brick here, that is a 1 by 1 by 1 2/3. So it's exactly 1 brick wide, or 2.5 plates. That would be 1 stud. So that's good. Here we've got 2 plates and a brick that combined are 5 plates wide, which means there's room for exactly 2 studs. And because when you have a snot brick, the stud is not centered on the side of the brick, it's actually moved up. So it's actually centered within the first 2.5 plates worth of that brick. So there's a half a plate left. That half a plate combined with these 2 plates is the other stud. So those actually all line up. A better way to give an explanation of that would be to compare a snot brick. This is a regular 1 by 1 snot brick, and this is a headlight brick, which is recessed a little bit and has this little lip at the bottom. Well, that lip is exactly a half plate thick, which means the side stud there is centered on a square that's actually 2.5 plates by 2.5 plates. So if we think about that in the context of our saucer section here, in fact, I'll just go ahead and put it on there. In fact, I'll just go ahead and put it on there. And we can see our 2 plates plus a half, 2 plates plus a half plate, and then the other stud. So that math all works out. So let's check out the other direction to make sure that these all line up. We'll assume that these are lined up because this is a snot brick and this is a snot brick. They're just oriented different directions, but the studs are lined up evenly. So we think of that as 2.5. These are all going to be in multiples of 2.5. And this is going to be 3. So let's take off a half. Let's add a brick here. That's 3.5 plus a plate is 4.5 plus another brick is 7.5. 7.5 divides evenly into 2.5, and that gets to our next stud, and that lines up. So we're good there. Leaving another half plate, 3.5, 4.5, 7.5 till we get to our other studs, and they all line up. 7.5 divides evenly by 2.5, leaving 3 studs in each gap. So we're good to go. And I can go ahead and press this plate on. We'll see if I can do this with the camera on it, because I have to have my hand underneath, and I'll do one of these on each side. You can see the sides starting to come apart here. That's why once I get this on, I feel a lot more comfortable about handling the build, because you do have to handle it with the other hand while you build, and that just increases the risk of one of these large sub-assemblies coming off that were so difficult to get lined up in the first place. Okay, I've gone ahead and completed the model, but there's just one more building step I want to talk about, and it's on the top part of the saucer here on the sides, and I'll use the instructions to illustrate how that's built up, where you've got all these snot pieces here, and then you start putting plates on top of them. And then right here in this step 4-35, you're asked to place a 6x14 plate over the top of all these other plates here. And that is a lot of studs to get that plate to stick to. And it was very hard to make that stick. If you've got one of those little mallets for making large plates stick, this is one where I'd recommend it. But this is also a challenge because the bottom part of the saucer had already been done and it's rounded. So you actually have to have the saucer held up in one hand while you press down on the plate with the other. And it took me several minutes on both sides to get that plate all the way down enough so that I could actually complete the build. But I did complete the build and I really like it. I think it stands out because it is made almost entirely out of the pearl gray bricks. I think the shaping here on the saucer, not just with the bulges here, but down the length of the ship and continuing on to where the secondary hull would be if it had one, all the way back to the nacelles, which I'll look at closer in a minute. I think that that's very true to the source material. And we even got these printed pieces right in the front to indicate it's the Enterprise NX-01. And there's no stickers in this set. We have all prints. Here in the front, we have a depiction of the ship's deflector dish. Because it didn't have a secondary hull, it doesn't have a deflector dish underneath like we would expect. So on this ship, it was designed to put it right there at the front of the saucer section. On each side, we've got some more printed pieces. Not sure what those represent, but they do help break up the solid gray of the rest of the ship. As we get to the back here, we've got a couple of supports to extend behind the saucer section that connect to our nacelles, which, although in the show I believe they're supposed to be cylindrical, they're made out of these angled pieces. on one side and just some wedges on the other. And really, I think whether or not that's accurate to the TV show, I still think it looks good and fits with the aesthetic of this ship. The front of the nacelles have these 2x2 round half spheres or bowls in the front. And behind there, we've actually got a translucent red gear to help complete the look of the front of the nacelles. If we look down the side, we've got some trans BlueBrixx to give it the look of the blue lights down the side of the nacelles. In the back, we don't have anything that distinctive to look at behind the nacelle, other than it looks like I've made a building error, and that should be turned the other way. But we do here in the back, I believe these are related to the impulse engines. They might be the exhaust vents or the engines themselves, and those are light blue, light trans blue plates. It's hard to see in this light. And we have the traditional red and green pieces, both on the nacelles and on the saucer section, to indicate which side is port and which side is starboard. Here on the underside of the ship, which I'm just going to show by holding it with my other hand, so I may have to zoom in to show any details, but we don't have a whole lot of detail. We do have some more printed pieces. On both sides, we have the NX-01 indicated, and those pieces, you can tell, were assembled before they were printed because they line up exactly as they're supposed to. Here in the back, you've got a printed brick that I think might be to represent the shuttle bay or the shuttle pods, and behind it might also have something to do with the shuttle pods. They didn't call them shuttlecraft on Enterprise, they called them shuttle pods. This piece here at the bottom is actually glow in the dark, but according to BlueBrixx, it's not because they necessarily wanted the piece to glow in the dark. They wanted a piece that was off-white, and this just happens to be the correct shade of white for that. Here, we've got these little paddle pieces. I don't know what else to call them, but they represent the phase cannons, which were not installed when the show first started. When the Enterprise first launched, it only had conventional torpedoes, which were very slow and didn't really cause a lot of damage. But about halfway through the first season, they realized they needed to make an upgrade, and they had the parts on board the ship. So the crew put them to use and built phase cannons and installed them on the underside of the saucer. Here underneath, you also see the Technic bricks, the holes in them that line up to where they are supposed to sit on the stand. Then one last thing I'd like to point out is how the nacelles are supported at an angle, as I think that's one of the more challenging things about building a Federation ship, or a United Earth ship in this case, is to figure out how to support the nacelles. And in this case, it's actually just using this 1x2 modified plate to keep this particular piece from falling too far down so it stays up at an angle, and it's using this wedge piece here to keep it from folding too far up. And I think it's pretty effective at keeping the nacelles at the appropriate angle for this ship. Then the last part of the build is what's typical for these BlueBrixx models, and it's just a couple of 4x4 tiles that are printed with information about the ship, and it includes the logo for the Enterprise. Finally, I thought I'd do a comparison between the NX-01 and one of the other larger BlueBrixx models, and I chose the Enterprise D from Star Trek The Next Generation. And you can see they're kind of similar in scale, with the NX-01 just being slightly smaller, although when you look at the details, you can tell things like the nacelles on the NX-01 are much smaller than what they are on the Enterprise D. The saucer section is a giant oval on the Enterprise D, whereas it's much more circular on the NX-01. And they're not in scale with each other, to be sure. You can tell by the plaques here that the NX-01 is supposed to be 225 meters long, and the Enterprise D is supposed to be 642 meters long, so almost 3 times the size. By piece count, the Enterprise D is only about 100 more pieces than the NX-01, with the NX-01 being about 1850 and the D being 1950. But The NX-01 was almost a 2,500 piece model. Once BlueBrixx decided to make this model, they told their designer to make it in the same scale as their previous released USS Voyager. And by scale, they meant piece count. And the Voyager model they made, which I don't have, but it was about 2,500 pieces. And they came up with a prototype, but it was almost comically large. And the thing that kept them from actually releasing the prototype was that the nacelles were too heavy and the whole back of the ship sagged, and they couldn't account for that. But what they didn't account for when they said make it in the same scale by piece count is they didn't account for the NX-01 not having a secondary hull. So they were using pieces that might have been used in the secondary hull of the Voyager and made the saucer and nacelles bigger, and it became too big of a model to actually make. Once BlueBrixx had realized their mistake, they realized they could make a smaller model that would look better. They could make it in what they call flat silver, what I believe we call pearl gray, and they could charge less for it and still make it a great model. And this model actually only cost €109 at the time it was released, which I thought was really good for a model with the pearl gray bricks and printed pieces and the newly designed stand and everything. And I think it looks great. And this was actually the first model that motivated me to actually buy a BlueBrixx set. And finally, since this set came out, there have been some comments about the flat silver / light pearl gray bricks having kind of these wavy lines in them. And some people are not happy about that, but the BlueBrixx video where they show the prototype actually explains that this is intentional because the Enterprise is a prototype ship. It is going to have its unique features and imperfections. And personally, I'm not bothered by it because I'm not necessarily inspecting the ship up close whenever I look at it. Thanks for watching my video about the Enterprise NX-01. This concludes my series of videos about my Star Trek building collection. I counted up 41 sets. I have a hunch I'm going to make it 42 before too long, and there'll certainly be a video about that. But I've had a great time building and showing off these Star Trek sets and just talking about the show. And I hope you've enjoyed these videos too. But until then, I've got plenty more videos in mind. It's coming up to pumpkin carving season, so I may be doing some videos about that if I find any interesting patterns to carve. And of course, I'm sure I'll be doing plenty of Lego building for Halloween. But one way or another, I'm sure I'll have more videos coming soon, and I hope you come back. But until then, remember, today is a good day to build.